Hello everyone, welcome back to the second video analysis on budget 2024. And yeah. So I'm Chung, the GP H2 History and O Levels English teacher here at the Discourse Education. And in this particular podcast, we break down current affairs and pitch the explanation for A-level students, right? Or to be more specific, A-level students in Singapore. But of course, if you're an international viewer and you stumble upon this, right, welcome. And yeah, so here we go. So just to recap here, in the previous video, we talked about, the fiscal policies, the taxation policies, the immediate measures, and, of course, the policies or plans that are about to be rolled out, to help Singapore pursue economic growth. And then we broke it down using the H2 history, general paper, and H2 economics perspectives. We're going to do the same thing again today, and I can definitely tell you for sure that there will be a third video coming up on this particular series. And yeah, because we just don't have the time to finish the rest of it today, but hopefully we can get it done tomorrow and everything will be up by the end of this week. So part 2, all right. For the budget 2024 summary, please go and watch the previous video, or go and watch the budget video, or go and read an executive summary on the Ministry of Finance website. Yeah, I would highly recommend that you go and read up on all those things to get some context so that you can better understand what it is that we are about to discuss here. So yeah. Alright, so continuing from yesterday, or rather from the previous video, the second directive, I guess, when you dive deep into the details of the budget itself, would be labor policies and lifelong learning. So things that, or rather policies that the government of Singapore is implementing in order to compel greater lifelong learning, as well as all the other labor policies. All right, so the first things first is a $4,000 top up in skills future credits for Singaporeans aged 40 and above. Wow, this is a huge amount. So of course we talked briefly about skills future in the previous video, but skills future in short is a program whereby Singaporeans can apply for certain courses, training courses and what have you, to upgrade their own skills or to gain new skills, and they get a credit from the government to do that. All right, so 4,000 credits, $4,000 worth in skills future credits is really nothing to sneeze at, because it is a huge amount, right? It is 8 times the amount for your typical Singaporeans, okay, or at least the younger Singaporeans, right? So all these credits, however, will be limited to training programs that will enhance the employability of workers. That's the main idea. So if you want to read up more on skills future, I would recommend that you click on this link. These slides can be found in our Telegram channel, right? So the Telegram channel link will be placed in the video description, so you can just click on that, subscribe to our channel, and then you can get access to all these slides. Now that's the first thing, okay? So $4,000 top up in skills future credit. The second thing really is that there will be subsidies provided for Singaporeans aged 40 and above to pursue another full-time diploma. So the thing here is that in Singapore, you will receive subsidies if you're a citizen, for our education system. But once you're done with that particular phase of your education, you no longer qualify for subsidies. So for instance, I have already completed my bachelor's program, right? So the bachelor's degree. And if let's say I want to go back to university and get another degree, I'll have to fork out the full amount. So all the tuition fees in full without any subsidies. Okay? But this time around, the government is rolling out this policy whereby Singaporeans aged 40 and above, they can pursue another full-time diploma. Alright, which again is a very, very big thing. And they can also even get a monthly training allowance, right? If they enroll in specific full-time courses. So of course the list that would be the details of which would be given out in a later date. And the allowance is essentially 50% of one's average income over the past year, right? Capped at $3,000 per month, which is just slightly a little bit off the median income. So this is huge, okay? And each individual can receive up to 24 months of such allowances. So if you're gonna go back to a polytechnic in Singapore, right, and pursue another full-time diploma, it's 3 years long. That means essentially the government is gonna pay, or rather give Singaporeans aged 40 and above an allowance to go back to school. And out of that 3 years, you can get an allowance for 2 years. So yeah, it's a very, very significant and major thing, alright? Again, we'll break down the details, or rather the impacts of these things in greater detail later on. And this is a bit of a shock, if I'm honest. There will be an introduction of a temporary financial support scheme for unemployed people. This is unprecedented in Singapore's history, okay? Not to say that the government has never helped unemployed people. They have, right? But it's always geared towards or rather it always depends on the situation, in that person's income must be of a certain level, right? So usually they'll definitely give a lot more help to lower income individuals or families, right? So there are welfare programs in place and social safety nets in place. But unemployment benefits, okay, unemployment benefits, right? This is something that's really unheard of. So in, you know, Western nations, that may be a lot more common, right? So the amount that or rather if the individual is not working, they can collect unemployment benefits from the country, or rather from any sort of like federal administration. Of course, it depends on their own rules and regulations. And for instance, you know, UK has it, US has it as well. Singapore has never had that. Alright? And even if there were the closest, I guess, you know, to unemployment benefits that I've seen would be during COVID-19. You know, policies like CERS, job support schemes, and what have you. And it's always geared towards transitioning retrenched individuals who cannot work in firms that have been very badly impacted by the pandemic. So for instance, tourism, right, is usually meant to help them transition to another job, you know. So SG United, that was the policy back then, implemented in 2020, and you can go for mid-career switches if you are really of that, you know, particular age, or even for young people like well, I'm not that young, but younger people, right? They could also utilize that within that specific context of the pandemic to get other jobs, right? It may not be as high paying, but at the very least it's something. But this is something entirely new. It's entirely unprecedented. We really haven't really had something like this before, right? Which is very interesting. But of course, we don't have the specifics, right? So we can't really make a judgment on that yet. But we can surmise certain things. So yeah, you know, we'll see. Okay, now for the analysis. Labor policies, H2H. Yeah, I had to edit a cough out. Yeah, so continuing from here. Okay. Labor policies, if we look at it from the H2 history perspective, as you would have noticed by now, most of our H2 history analysis is really on the basis of looking at what's currently happening and then connecting it to all the knowledge that you would learn in the subject in itself, right? In terms of the economic development of Southeast Asia, or in this specific case, Singapore, right? So over here, initial focus on manufacturing shifted to HCI and then knowledge-based economy. We already talked about that in the previous video, but the idea here is that because of such rapid development, the population education rates and training rates would not be able to keep up with all these rapid changes, because when we were still focusing on manufacturing, right, education, or at least the extent, or rather the advancement of the education, was not priority number one back then. They would perhaps, by there I mean the older generations of Singaporeans, they would perhaps receive an education up to, let's say, maybe what is equivalent to O levels today. Then they would go out there and then they would work in the factories, take on all these manufacturing jobs, so on and so forth. But because Singapore experienced such a rapid economic growth, within one generation, right? We are literally talking about one generation, because 1965 we were still pretty much underdeveloped, but then by the time 1970s rolled around, we were already beginning to introduce 4 or 5 room, not even 4-room flats. We were beginning to introduce 5-room flats, right? And which speaks to the increasing wealth of the nation as a whole. So yeah, but unfortunately that came obviously at a cost, in that the older generations would struggle to keep up, which is also why you see a lot of policies targeting re-education, right? Retraining, upskilling, so on and so forth, allowing them to go back to school, get a diploma. Okay, but yeah, the content of H2 history provides additional context here for your greater understanding. So history students, you have an advantage here. Okay, now from the GP's perspective, right? Social issues. So the trouble in Singapore now at the moment really is that we are facing an aging population, right? So all the policies related to retraining, as I said earlier, is really to help the seniors, not just the elderly, but just seniors in general. So middle-aged Singaporeans as a whole, to make sure that they don't get left behind, right? So we did talk about this briefly, or did we analyze it a lot? Honestly, I can't remember, but we did mention it when we covered the whole Simply Go fiasco, right? But the older people, as technology rapidly advances, they get left behind. So all these policies are really meant to help them, right? And it also ameliorates, the increasing phenomena of elderly isolation. Why? Because number one, the middle-aged to the elderly people, they can go back to school to learn, okay? And that's where they will widen their social circles, right? Or when they go for retraining, they become more employable despite their age. I mean, of course, despite their age, that there will be increased wages to pay them, as you will see later on. But nevertheless, it makes them more employable, right? Which also means that if they are going out to work, to study, get in touch with, young people, or people of all ages, from all different backgrounds and communities, that decreases the possibility, or at least the likelihood of elderly isolation. All right. And then of course, they get the skills to deal with 21st century's challenges. So obviously at the moment right now, one of the more salient challenges in Singapore that we are facing, specifically in regard to the elderly, would be the rising preponderance of scams, online scams. So if they can go back to school and learn all these things, they become a little bit more tech savvy, then they will know how to handle all these kinds of situations, right? Or at least I surmise that's the idea here. And of course, the cultivation of lifelong learning, right? The idea here being that we want to change our mindset, okay, to deal with an increasingly uncertain world, right? Because the world it just seems like for the past 8 years, the world is going quite nuts, So if we constantly stay curious and we learn, right, and we take on that mindset, then we become more adaptable citizens, or at least that's the idea, okay? Now, from the economic point of view, within the context of GP, these policies would help the elderly and the seniors remain competitive. It's as simple as that, right? And at the same time, it also makes a greater use of our population as a whole. If our population is aging, that means the older people will need to continue working if the society and the economy as a whole has to grow, right? Because imagine if let's not get into that. Yeah. So a productive workforce, right? Of course there are other ancillary benefits as well, but from an economic perspective, the productive workforce also ensures that the economy can continue growing. So for students who don't take H2 economics, if you want to analyze your examples, right, explain the impacts of your examples without using all the jargons and all that, this is how you explain it, okay? So now for the economics analysis. So training, obviously, it improves the competitive advantage of Singapore's industries, right? Because when you allow retraining of the labor, that improves the firm's productive efficiency. We have already talked about this, so I'm not going to expound upon it too much. But at the same time, you can also create fluidity in the company's workforce, okay? Because when the workers are trained in either more advanced level of their skills, or they get more skills, then it is easier for all these companies to redeploy their workers, because then they will have the capabilities to handle different portfolios, right? And this can help reduce their costs, their fixed costs, because then they don't necessarily need to hire like specialists. They can make use of all these utility players, all right? And it can also achieve greater synergy between departments. Okay, of course, in reality, things are often not that simple, right? Because ultimately, it also still depends on every single person. Their individual personalities, their ability to work well with others, so on and so forth. But from a larger sort of point of view, this is certainly one of the intended outcomes, okay? So the second one, education of the workers, especially the seniors, right, helps improve labor as a factor of production by maximizing the available workforce. So in the previous slide, I was talking about like how we can make greater use of the population as a whole. This is the technical explanation, right? So instances of retirement becoming higher, okay? Again, another subject-verb agreement error here, but this is what you get when you do your work at 2 in the morning, okay? Aging population also means that skills of current workers are becoming obsolete, right? Because the things that they learned in the past, things like, let's say, using of the abacus, who the hell uses that nowadays? Okay, so the incentivization of all this retraining, right, would get all these individuals to go back to school, okay, or take a course to retrain themselves through Skills Future, okay. And if the government is providing an allowance, right, company costs of sending their employees for further training will be reduced, so that would help manage the discretionary costs, as we talked about in the previous video. And the wages, paid to these workers, because all the wages will increase eventually, it will not become too large of an opportunity cost for all these companies, okay, because the fixed costs will increase, then they have less resources. It's as simple as that. And of course, unemployment benefits. Now, to be clear, based on how Singapore does things, I sincerely doubt if the unemployment benefits are, or rather will be, rolled out in such a way that will be consistent with what we see in Western societies. I highly doubt that. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, in the first place, it's already considered a temporary financial support scheme, because, like I said earlier, typically what the Singapore government does is that instead of providing outright benefits, okay, we instead help Singaporeans who are unemployed look for new jobs. Okay, that's what we do. They will say, okay, you need training, fine, let's find a way to help you, right, so that you can go back out into the workforce, make a living. So I don't think this would be unemployment benefits per se, right? But let's just assume that even if it's a temporary thing, it is a form of unemployment benefit. What that does, okay, is it deals with three types of unemployment, effectively all three. Although the last one, there's just a huge caveat that we need to address there, okay, which I'll talk about in a bit. So first things first, obviously structural unemployment stemming from push towards technological advancements and an aging population. Aging population, as I said earlier, their skills become obsolete, so they may get laid off, even though that's not really a very nice thing to do, but businesses, right? Profit maximization. And not only that, all the investments in AI, right? Digital infrastructure, incentivizing firms to make the push towards adopting newer forms of technology, as we talked about in the previous video, that would also cause structural unemployment, potentially, right? Because if certain jobs become obsolete, we talked about this. So unemployment benefits, albeit temporary, okay, can help deal with this problem, right? Sort of like preempting what might potentially happen. Number two, it also helps deal with cyclical unemployment, because despite Singapore experiencing economic growth, right, certainly cyclical unemployment may not necessarily be as bad at this very moment in comparison to, let's say, 4 years ago, when COVID was, sorry, not 4 years ago, 10,000 years ago, right? So nevertheless, the fallout from the pandemic is still occurring. So the unemployment benefits may potentially help mitigate this problem, right? Or not just due to the pandemic, but just cyclical unemployment stemming from all the economic troubles that, or I shouldn't say troubles, right? The uncertainty that's coming from the world today, right? If you are interested in the macroeconomic context, please go and watch the previous video, alright? Now, finally, the last one, frictional unemployment, stemming from a slew of workers changing their jobs in light of the pandemic fallout. So here's the thing. This one requires a little bit of current affairs knowledge, I guess. And again, there is a little bit of an interdisciplinary element to this as well. When the pandemic struck, okay, many Singaporeans were re-evaluating their lives. I myself, I was one of them. And in re-evaluating their lives, many of them perhaps, especially the younger people, right? And all these decisions in of themselves, they are what caused the older generation to brand us in a certain way. But let's not go there. We decided, hey, maybe the job or the life that I'm living might not be as worth it, right? Because obviously there was a potentially existential threat at play here, so everyone is reevaluating their lives. And so during the 2020, and this was a worldwide phenomenon, there was this huge thing happening, which is the Great Resignation, right? So even when many companies were hiring, they couldn't manage to get talent because so many people were just en masse just resigning from their jobs. So from that fallout, right? And this is just a general trend that's happening nowadays. So young people, typically we tend to hop between jobs. Like we work at a place for a couple of years, then we go to another place to work. I mean, unless you are doing education like myself, so that's what I've always been doing. Okay, so we change our jobs, right? And the unemployment benefits may help cushion this impact. But the reason why I say there is a huge caveat here is that it ultimately still depends on what all these unemployment benefits entail. Because most likely, what's going to happen is that the unemployment benefits will have an eligibility criteria, and it's going to only be eligible for workers who were effectively shit canned from their jobs, right? Who are retrenched from their jobs. So if you quit your job, that's your own pass out. That's our style. That's Singapore style. That's your own problem. Okay. Look for your own new job, right? So yeah, that's why there's a huge caveat here. Okay, which is why at the end of the day, I'll talk about this later on. Yeah, so that's the labor policies. All right, the next thing would be inequality. Now, as you know, inequality is a very, very huge problem now in Singapore. Okay, I'm not sure if I've talked about it in any of the podcast episodes, but yeah, certainly even in the context of education in itself, right? Oh yeah, I guess I did talk about it in the response to the CNA commentary article on tuition. The inequality here is quite strong, right? To be clear, the inequality I'm talking about is before factoring in government transfers. That means before factoring in government payments, right? Fiscal spending that would help alleviate the inequalities. So in this particular case, okay, what the government decided to do is to enhance the workfare income supplement scheme. All right. So what is the workfare income supplement scheme? Essentially, it was meant to, or it still is rather, it is meant to help lower income employees in Singapore, right? So previously the income cap was 2.5k. If you earn below 2.5k, you can possibly apply for this, right? Depending again on whether or not you fulfill all the other eligibility criteria, and you can get cash payouts to supplement your low income. So that cap has been raised to 3,000. Right, and then of course annual workfare payouts has been increased from 4.2 to 4.9, i.e. increased government spending to supplement the incomes of the lower income workers, right? Local qualifying salary raised as well. Simply put, these pertain really more to companies or firms that hire foreign workers. Okay, and in this particular case, if we are talking about work permit or S-Pass, that means firms that either hire the blue-collar workers for work permit, S-Pass would be the white-collar workers, right? There is a quota, by the way, in case you are not aware, right, for companies to hire foreign workers, they must at the very least hire a certain amount of local employees. The specific details are dependent on the pass that you are applying for. So whether it's a work permit, employment pass, or S pass, right? So if you're interested, go and read up on that using this link. Now, when they say local qualifying salary raised to 1.6, sorry, from 1.4k, that means that to be able to apply for a work permit or S pass, right, you need to hire a local, and the local qualifying salary must be previously, it must be 1.4k. Now it has been raised to 1.6, which effectively means for companies that need to hire foreign workers, right, their fixed costs have increased, okay, because they need to pay higher salaries for their local workers. Not only that, the government is also raising co-funding under the Progressive Wage Credit Scheme. Alright, so the PWCS wage ceiling increased from 2.5 to 3k in 2025, and the fund was also topped up by $1 billion. So this is a very new policy. Okay, what it is really is, as its name suggests, a credit scheme, right, to help employers deal with all the increasing wages of their employees. Because of all the previous policies, and of course the policies that were implemented in the previous year's budget statements, or whatever other tax policies or tax credit policies that were implemented, right? Employers, so firms, would face, a higher fixed cost once again. So this is meant to help, allay some of those costs. And this one is a very interesting one. Introduction of the IT Progression Award. Now, to be clear, gone are the days, right? Thankfully so, whereby you have a meme from the local film I'm Not Stupid, okay? Where you get a hairdresser. I can't remember the actor's name, but I can't remember what role he was playing. But essentially, it's talking about how he's an IT graduate, and IT stands for it's the end, right? Long gone are the days of those memes, thankfully. Okay, thankfully, right? But certainly more could still be done, and this is what the government is trying to do here. $5,000 top up to the PSEA. So in case you're wondering what that is, the PSEA stands for Post-Secondary Education something. Alright, I can't remember. Oh, Post-Secondary Education Account. Okay, account. So it is an account that you can use, right, however much money you have in there, to pay for your tertiary education expenses. By expenses, I mean school fees. Alright? So if IT grads choose to enroll in a diploma, they can get a $5,000 top up to that. Okay? And if they graduate from those diploma courses, they can get a 10k top up into the CPF OA accounts, ordinary accounts. Now, the rationale for this particular policy, as laid out by Lawrence Wong, was that this would help give them a little bit of a boost to achieve, towards home ownership and eventually retirement. So for some context here, alright, the ITE path is a long one. Because it really depends on what you're doing. Some students might go straight into higher NITEC, which is a more advanced form of the ITE program, or they have to do NITEC first. Alright, so if they do NITEC first, then they have to go on to do higher NITEC, right? So that would be an additional, I can't remember how many years exactly, but it is, I think, minimally 4 years, 4 to 5 years, thereabouts. Please fact check that. And from there, they can get the certification from ITE. And from there, certainly they can start looking for jobs, but they wouldn't be able to command as high a pay, which is why they will need to go and get a diploma, right? But a diploma course is 3 years long in polytechnic. By the time they graduate, okay, and let's say really, they want to forge ahead and go and get a degree in a university. It depends on what course they go through, but that's another 3 to 4 years. So their post-secondary and tertiary education path would take minimally a decade. So by the time they start working, right, and for the male Singaporeans, we still haven't considered things like national service. They would be at least 27, 28 years old. So this one, I think, is a really, really great thing. That's just my personal opinion. And it would really help them, okay, in that, they can make use of all these top financial incentives to go and further their education in this way. Okay? And then the next thing here would be things related to social mobility, right? So the government will provide additional support under Comlink Plus with Comlink Plus progress packages, right? Yeah, so that was alliteration. Now, this thing was introduced in 2021 nationwide, okay, and it's meant to support low-income families, and to be more specific, those who are living in public rental flats under the public rental scheme. So the public rental scheme in HDB is a program whereby low-income families can apply to live in one of the public rental flats. So in essence, right, in the equivalent to Western nations would be rent controls, right? Because the rent is controlled by HDB. So they pay lower rent, but of course there's a very robust means testing process involved. That means the HDB will have to check, or how much they earn and their income levels and their needs and all that, So it's really for the very, very poor people or low income people in general, or even the destitute, right? And I think this is a very, very great program, the public rental scheme, I mean. So it ensures that they have, a place to live, right? But Comlink Plus, what is it then? All these families, right, low-income families, specifically, we are talking about low-income families with children, if they work with the Ministry of Social and Family Matters, right, to take certain steps to improve their own life. So for instance, sending their kids to school, preschool, or taking on certain steps to help their children do well so that they can succeed in life in whatever it is. It is a case-by-case thing, right? So that they can achieve stability, self-reliance, and social mobility. Okay. What the government is going to do is to provide additional cash payouts. It's as simple as that. But I think this is a very, very great, policy in place to help low-income families, especially those with children. All right, because if you are low income, okay, but you have kids, all right, so what that means is you'll be working whole day, then you do not have the financial resources to get additional help, and when you finish work, you have to take care of your children, right? So the scarcity is always there, scarcity of all these resources. Okay, so if we analyze it from a GP perspective, right, improving inequality, as the name of the measure suggests, okay, with the IT, what that does is it levels the playing field in education specifically, because obviously if you are watching this, you would be on the A levels track, right? A levels is the quickest track already, really. That's to the quickest path to tertiary education. Okay, so the IT award that is meant to incentivize, greater levels of education, right? That will help level the playing field. Now, from a cultural perspective, you can see somewhat quite a bit of conservative influences also. And I'm not talking about the new batshit crazy neoliberal stuff. No. I'm talking about like proper conservative. In that the welfare policies are there to help lift you up of a bad situation so that you can eventually fend for yourself. That's the way that Singapore has always done things. Alright, so as you can see here. Okay, raise wages, yes. Alright. We can try and level the playing field, but they must take the step to enroll in a diploma course. The government will provide additional funding, but only if the families work with MSF and take certain action. So they incentivize you to take all these actions to better your own life, okay? And once that's done, then they'll be like, hey, you know, well done. Now you can make a living for yourself. And what that does essentially is it lessens the burden on the, okay, I shouldn't say burden, it lessens future welfare spending, as you can see here. Right? It decreases future welfare spending. Because if more of the population are able to pull themselves up and we achieve greater equality, of course, by pulling themselves up, I'm not talking about the bootstrap mentality. I'm talking about with governmental aid, right? Then we do not need to spend as much money on all these social safety nets that are put in place, right? And of course, increases in wages means that lower income citizens will have more means to cope with the cost of living. And yeah, alright? That's the GP analysis. Now, for the economics analysis, okay, raising wages, right? It ensures that consumers will have greater disposable income, sure, but it will also increase fixed costs for firms, like what I said earlier. And obviously, when that happens, as I said in the previous video, if the total costs of firms increase as a whole, they're gonna offload the costs onto the consumers. That's just the way it is. Alright, so while the government is mandating that wages would need to be increased, okay, you have the PWCS, the Progressive Wage Credit Scheme. Okay, so in case you have forgotten what that is, it's right here. No, I've lost it. Oh dear. Definitely somewhere. There we go. Yeah. So we have this, right, in place to ensure that, you know, the some of the costs will be allayed as well, right? So offset the costs. And then, of course, coupled with all the various investments in education and retraining, all the things that we have talked about thus far, not just in this video, but in the previous one, that improves productive efficiency, and therefore firms would be able to potentially find other ways, right, to either increase their total revenue, right? And there are many ways to do it. Don't really want to break that down too much here. And also reduce their marginal costs of production. Okay? And the safety nets bit, we talked about that already, right? But another idea here, as I said earlier, you know, the scarcity will be somewhat reduced. So for some context, and I guess this is again crossing more into the GP side of things. It is difficult, right, to truly think about taking steps to improve your own life if your immediate needs, if the fulfillment of your immediate needs is at threat. And we are literally talking about your basic goods and services. Okay, your necessities, daily necessities. So if you are deprived of all those on a regular basis, the scarcity mindset will really set in, and that would impact a lot of the decisions that you make, you know, and it's not their fault, right? And it becomes very difficult to break out of that cycle. So that's why all these social safety nets investments would really help to alleviate that and ensure that, you know, there is support in place that they can take the steps to improve and ameliorate their own lives. All right. Now, the last bit for this video. How long have we been going? 45 minutes. Jesus. Okay. Yeah. Supporting families, the nuclear family. Right. So I talked about, or rather I mentioned this concept in the previous video, but I realized I haven't really defined what it is. So the nuclear family, in short, refers to a family with parents intact, with kids, possibly even the grandparents. That's just called a nuclear family. Okay? Or at least that's the simple definition. So the first thing here would be education. Alright? Government supported preschools. Okay, so your anchor operators and partner operators. Alright? In case you're wondering what those schemes are, please go and read up more on that. But in short, anchor operators will be your biggest franchises of kindergartens in Singapore or preschools, right? And partner operators will be private ones, typically. So the school fees are going to be lowered. Yeah, the school fees are going to be lowered, all right? Monthly school fees. And, you know, subsidies for lower income families will be increased, right? Even for lower income families with non-working mothers. So why do they include non-working mothers? Because the idea, or at least why is it that this is only now being implemented? Because non-working mothers, if you are not working, the common assumption is that they'll be able to take care of their kids, right? But yeah, obviously things are not as simple as that. Okay? And of course, topping up the EduSave Endowment Fund. What is this? The fund is meant to fund things. So all the programs that you know, go through in school, all your distinctive programs and CCA stuff, you know, here and there. Yeah, the funding for it, I mean, it partly comes from this, all right? And the government is going to top up an additional $2 billion. Okay? Now, next thing. This is a big one. Young families and families in general, right? The Prime Plus standard framework for BTO. I'm not going to break down what it is here because we have really gone on for quite a while and we still have one more video to do. Alright, PM Lee explained it in his National Day rally last year. So I'll recommend you go and check out what it is. But essentially, okay, Prime Plus standard BTOs, they are flats categorized as such. Okay, so in case you're wondering what a BTO is, essentially if a government announces, right, or rather to be more specific, HDB announces that, okay, they're going to develop this particular estate to build more flats, right, then eligible Singaporeans can bid for a flat in that particular estate, right? And then the government will build it afterwards. So build to order. Yeah. The problem was that in the past there was not much of a differentiation in terms of the regulations, but with the introduction of the Prime Plus standard framework, there are changes in the regulations itself. Okay, so go and read up on this if you're interested. Right, and then of course the Parenthood Provisional Housing Scheme Open Market Voucher. This one is reserved for families with kids only as they wait for the completion of their BTOs. All right, so they can get a voucher for 1 year to rent a flat essentially under the PPSH scheme. All right, the details are not out yet, but in short, what this is meant to do is to really help house all these families in the meantime while their BTOs are still building. And the reason why we want to provide all these vouchers is because of the COVID lag. Many estates have yet to be completed. yeah, because of COVID-19, right? When things shut down, essentially. And of course, there will be more help for families with, differently abled individuals. Okay, so SPED schools. School fees, again, are being reduced on that front, right? And expansion of all these sheltered workshops, day activity centers, and any enabling service hubs. So what do all these things do? Okay, DACs, so your day activity centers, right? They equip the differently abled with daily living skills. Okay, your enabling services hubs, they just provide general support for many of these families. And the sheltered workshops, they offer vocational training or employment for the differently able. If you're interested, please go and read up on all these links. All right. Now, from a GP perspective, okay, from a GP perspective first, all right, I don't think we would have many opportunities to use the H2 history perspective anymore. I mean, I guess there is the bit on national unity, but that's not going to be in this video. All right. So, investments in education through the EduSave Endowment Fund, right, helps fulfill the purpose of the new syllabus in cultivating 21st century learners. Okay, I'm gonna bite my tongue here. All right. The idea being that, the government is essentially investing more in the education system in itself, right, to make sure that students would be equipped with all these skills, critical thinking abilities to deal with, the all the things that are happening in the world, right? And of course, lowering preschool fees will ensure that parents can afford to send their kids to preschool more easily, right? And this is particularly important because why education is so important for young people, or by young people I mean like your toddlers and adolescents, because that's when the cognitive development is particularly critical. It's a very, very critical stage of their lives, because that's when they learn all their motor skills, their basic cognition skills, so on and so forth, which would thereafter affect their abilities in the future. All right, I mean, unless they are differently able. So very, very important, right? Childhood education. So yeah, parents can afford to send their kids, right? But just don't send them to the place where your kid may potentially be pushed or slapped by somebody, right? Next thing, social issues analysis. Lowered fees for SPED schools and expansion of facilities reduce the mental stress on parents with kids that are differently able. Because the thing is that for many of these families, somebody has to essentially become a full-time caregiver already. I mean, of course, it depends on the extent of the differently able, right? But yeah, so there's a lot of emotional or investments of emotional support and all that. Okay, if the fees are lowered further, then they have more cash flow, right? That will really, really help reduce the stress for them. From a cultural perspective, okay, obviously lower fees for SPED schools and all that, it cultivates an even more inclusive society, right? And the housing options for the Prime Standard Plus framework, it helps to maintain the nuclear family. Okay, so I have talked about this in one of our videos. I can't remember which one, but it is absolutely in our interests, by our interests I mean Singapore's interests, to maintain the nuclear family. We can look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, which is that maintenance of a nuclear family means that parents would give birth more, right, or give birth to more children, and that will help alleviate the whole aging population situation. Number two, it really stems from a conservative kind of society, right, in that we want to maintain certain traditions or values or virtues that we would associate with being Singaporean. So that's part of also, building national identity and all that. Although it's not the most important thing, right? Just to make it clear, specifically vis-a-vis the whole national identity thing, but the maintenance of the nuclear family is, obviously receiving a lot of emphasis in the past few years or even the past several years, right? And of course, lowering all these fees alleviates some costs for parents. You already see that occurring, as a common theme here. And incentivize young parents to have more kids, right? Lower cost ma, you still get a baby bonus, right? So why not have more kids? Add on to the birth rates, please. We are, that's what the government is trying to encourage here. Okay. Now, from an economics perspective, not much to talk about here. I mean, technically there is, but a properly exhaustive breakdown of this budget honestly can take quite a few videos, so I'm not gonna do that, right? But we just look at it in general terms, all right? The education fees are, so we are talking about the lowering of the preschool fees as well as your SPED schools, right? The thing is, the government sees education as a public good, obviously, okay? And as I said in the previous video, if you're unsure about the definitions of all these jargons, please go and read up on them, right? So lowering fees and increasing subsidies for lower income families, you ensure, greater access and thereafter greater equity, right? Because all schools are good schools. Okay? Yeah. So this is how the government implements policies in such a way that it positions education as a public good here. All right? And now, of course, the BTO policy in itself. Here, what we can see is, I guess, a form of product differentiation. To be clear, HDB flats are not products, or you shouldn't think of them as products in that traditional sense, because it's not as though it's being supplied by an entity that's seeking to maximize their profits, right? It is often under the purview of the government. But of course, then their contractors are the ones who build it and they are the profit maximization ones, but their contracts are with the government, not with the consumers. So the Prime Plus standard framework, okay, I assume that you have already read up on it. So your different regulations regarding the MOP, right, minimum occupancy period, or the amount of subsidies that are provided for certain places, like let's say your prime flats would receive more subsidies as opposed to your standard and plus flats, right? But different regulations in place, okay? This one really is meant to help mitigate a couple of things, right? Number one, demand pool inflation. So why is there a demand pool inflation of housing? Because of COVID, right? When the circuit breaker occurred, right? Many people were stuck here, so they had to find a place to live. And number two, when the work stopped as a whole, right? Many flats were not being built. So supply shocks, quantity supply decreased, quantity demanded shoot up. It's not a case of ceteris paribus already. It's a very clear-cut surge in housing prices. That's why there was a crazy surge in rental rates. In the budget speech, Lawrence Wong said since 2022. Actually, it already started in 2021. And yeah, that's the demand pool inflation side of it. right? The cost push inflation really comes from the increase in prices of raw materials, as we talked about in the where we were breaking down the macroeconomic context in the previous video. All right. So product differentiation also provides value for your Singaporeans if they want to live in a prime area. It's not as though that option is locked out from them. Okay, because flats ultimately are public housing. You know, they are part of public housing. If you want to buy a condominium in Orchard Road, by all means knock yourself out, right? The government is not going to subsidize any of that. But if let's say you want to get a flat in one of the more prime estates in Singapore, the government is offering more subsidies for that, such that Singaporeans as a whole can choose to apply for it. But of course, with that comes certain strings attached. All right. But fundamentally, what we need to understand here for flats in Singapore is that public housing is not technically a public good, even though we try to position it as such as much as possible. And the reason for that, simply put, is because of the limited capacity that we have, right? Limited availability, limited land. And just from the very simple concept of, for somebody to be able to live in that flat, someone else, it comes at the expense of somebody else. So that's why it is technically not a public good. But we try to make it as such as much as possible. So that's what this particular BTO policy is all about, right? I would recommend also checking out the National Day rally from last year. I should have made a video on that, but never mind. Yeah, so that's the economic analysis for this particular portion. And yeah, so I guess we are done for this part again. All right. Again, if you are interested in, taking general paper, O-levels English, or even H2 history tuition with us, do contact us at this number, and we offer free trial lessons, 0 strings attached. Or you can look at go onto our website and get more information from there. And more importantly, if you have a question, please feel free to submit a question using that link there. All right. We have only had 2 questions thus far, which I think is really kind of amazing in of itself, considering our views. But nevertheless, we plow on, right? Because we are doing this podcast really just to value add, for students in Singapore in general. So yeah, that's it for this one. All right. I'll see you guys in the next part of the budget analysis.